My son's mother disappeared on the happiest day of our lives. English version. Have you ever felt like your entire life crumbled in a matter of minutes? If you had gone through everything I went through in your life, you would also understand why I still wake up every morning with a heavy heart, searching for answers that never came. My name is James. I'm 57 years old today, and this is the most painful story I've ever lived. It's about the day that should have been the happiest of my life, but became the beginning of my worst nightmare. The day when Sarah, my son's mother, simply disappeared without a trace. It was June 15th, 2015. A sunny Saturday that began with the promise of a new beginning. Sarah and I had been together for 3 years, and our son Matthew was only 2 years old at the time. We decided to get married, not just because of the love we felt for each other, but because we wanted to give Matthew the stable family he deserved. I remember every detail of that morning. The smell of fresh coffee that Sarah prepared at 6 in the morning, even though she was nervous. The way she hummed a song I couldn't identify while arranging the last flowers that arrived for the ceremony. Matthew running around the house in his little tuxedo, laughing and saying, "Mommy Princess, Daddy Prince," in that sweet child's voice. Sarah was radiant. At 28 years old, she had a natural beauty that left me speechless even after 3 years together. That morning, she seemed to glow with a different light. Her green eyes were more alive than ever, and when she gave me that smile that now haunts me every night, I thought it was the smile of the happiest woman in the world. "James," she said, holding my face with both hands, "thank you for giving me the chance to be truly happy." At the time, I thought those were the words of an emotional bride. Today, after 10 years, I realized those words had a weight I couldn't understand. The ceremony was to be at 4 in the afternoon at the small church where we met. Sarah volunteered there helping with the children's choir, and I was the new engineer in town who had gone to Mass just to please my mother, who insisted I needed to find God and a good woman. I ended up finding Sarah, and for 3 years I believed I had found both. The morning flew by. Guests started arriving around noon. My mother, who had come from Chicago especially for the wedding, kept repeating how proud she was of me. "Finally, you're settling down your life, James. Sarah is a good girl, and Matthew needs this stability." My brother Robert, who was my best man, arrived with his family around 2 in the afternoon. He was 5 years younger than me, but had always been the most centered in the family. "Man, you look nervous," he said, laughing. "It's just a wedding, not the end of the world." If he only knew how prophetic those words would become. Around 3 in the afternoon, Sarah said she needed to retire to put on her dress and make the final touches to her makeup. "See you at the altar, my love," she said, giving me a soft kiss on the cheek. "It's going to be perfect." At 3:45, I was already at the altar. Pastor Williams, a 70-year-old man who had known Sarah since she was a child, was beside me talking about the beauty of matrimony. The guests, about 50 people between family and close friends, were all in their places. Matthew was in the front row with my mother, fidgeting with his bow tie and whispering things only he understood. 4 o'clock arrived. The wedding march began to play. Everyone stood up and looked toward the church entrance. But Sarah didn't appear. Initially, I wasn't worried. Women always run a little late at these moments, I thought. Maybe she was having difficulties with the dress or the veil. The pastor looked at me with a reassuring smile. "Patience, my son. Brides need their time." 5 after 4. The music stopped. The guests began whispering among themselves. My mother picked up Matthew and looked at me with a worried expression. Robert came up to the altar and whispered, "I'll check what's happening." 10 after 4. Robert returned with an expression I had never seen on his face, a mixture of confusion and fear. "James," he said quietly, "she's not in the room. The bridesmaid said she left 20 minutes ago saying she needed to get something from the car, but no one has seen her since then." My heart began beating faster. I left the altar and went to the room where Sarah was getting ready. The dress was hanging perfectly as if it had never been touched. The makeup was spread on the table, but there were no signs of haste or struggle. It was as if she had simply evaporated. "Sarah!" I shouted through the church corridor. "Sarah, where are you?" That's when Sarah's younger sister, Jennifer, only 16 at the time, began to cry. "She said she loved me very much and to always take care of Mom," Jennifer sobbed. "I thought it was just bridal nerves, but now I'm scared." The next 30 minutes were a blur of frantic activity. We searched throughout the church and the parking lot and the surroundings. Sarah's car was there with the keys inside. Her purse was on the passenger seat with her cell phone, wallet, everything untouched. It was as if she had simply walked to nowhere. At 5 in the afternoon, we called the police. Officer Martinez, an experienced man who knew Sarah's family, took our statement seriously. In cases like this, there's usually a simple explanation, he said. Maybe she got cold feet at the last minute and needs time to think. But I knew Sarah. She wasn't the type of person who ran from responsibilities. She was determined, brave, the woman who faced her family when she decided to have Matthew at 25, even being single. The woman who worked 2 jobs to support our son until I entered their lives. She wouldn't run. If you're enjoying our story, subscribe to our channel. Leave your like and comment what you would do in this situation. Your support helps me reach even more people who need to know they're not alone. Night fell and Sarah hadn't returned. The guests left one by one, some in tears, others in shocked silence. My mother took Matthew home, promising to take care of him while I continued searching. I spent the entire night driving through the city streets, stopping at every place where Sarah and I had memories together. The park where we took Matthew to play, the cafe where we had our first date, the library where she studied accounting on Monday and Wednesday nights. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was when I returned home at 4 in the morning, exhausted and desperate, that I found something that chilled my blood. On the kitchen table, there was a photo of us, Sarah, me, and Matthew last Christmas. But it wasn't just any photo. It was a photo that was stored in our family album, and now it was there on top of a letter I had never seen before. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. It was in Sarah's handwriting, but the words I read changed my life forever. James, when you read this, I'll already be far away. There are things about me you never knew. Things I can't tell without putting you and Matthew in danger. The man I ran from 3 years ago found me. He promised to leave you both in peace if I came back with him. I can't allow you to pay for my past. Take care of our son and tell him that Mommy loves him more than anything. One day when he's older, tell him I had no choice. Forgive me. Sarah. My world completely collapsed at that moment. What man? What past? In 3 years of relationship, Sarah had never mentioned anything about running from someone. I thought I knew every part of the woman I was about to marry. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. At 57 years old today, I can say with certainty that I never experienced such deep pain and such a devastating sense of betrayal. After having lived so much fear, my head screamed from so much inner loneliness. Officer Martinez returned on Monday to investigate more thoroughly. When I showed him Sarah's letter, I saw his expression change drastically. Mr. James, this changes everything. We're no longer dealing with a runaway due to nerves. This could be a case of kidnapping or threat, but I knew it wasn't quite like that. The handwriting was undoubtedly Sarah's, and there were details in the letter that only she would know, like the affectionate nickname she used for Matthew, my little son, and the reference to our first kiss on the blue bench at the Central Park. I began to go through every aspect of Sarah's life that I thought I knew. I talked to Jennifer, her younger sister, who was devastated and blamed herself for not noticing something was wrong. She was always reserved about the past, Jennifer told me, wiping away tears. When we asked about Matthew's father, she always changed the subject. She said it was a one-night stand, but now I don't know what to believe anymore. I sought out Sarah's mother, Mrs. Rosa, a 65-year-old woman who had always treated me like a son. She was in pieces, but agreed to tell me everything she knew. James, my daughter came home 4 years ago, 3 months pregnant, with just one suitcase of clothes, Mrs. Rosa told me, sitting in the kitchen where Sarah grew up. She said she had ended a bad relationship and needed time to recover. She never told us details about the child's father, only that he was dangerous and it was better if she never met him again. Dangerous how? I asked, feeling a chill in my stomach. She had marks, James. Marks on her arms and neck that looked like someone who had been hurt. When we asked, she said she had fallen or hit something. But a mother knows. A mother always knows. This revelation hit me like a punch in the stomach. For 3 years, I believed I knew the woman I loved, that I understood her story, her fears, her dreams. Discovering there was a whole past of abuse she had hidden made me question every moment we spent together. I began to remember small signs that at the time seemed like harmless quirks of Sarah's personality. How she always got nervous when the phone rang and she didn't recognize the number. How she insisted on always shopping in neighboring towns, never in our own city. how she avoided social media and always asked us to keep our relationship relatively private. I thought she was just a reserved person, I confessed to Officer Martinez during our third meeting. Now I realize she was hiding. The officer nodded understandingly. Women in domestic violence situations develop these survival strategies, Mr. James. They learn to become invisible to protect themselves and their children. We decided to investigate further. Martinez gained access to Sarah's records from the past 5 years. We discovered she had legally changed her name 4 years ago, from Sarah Michelle Thompson to Sarah Michelle Santos. Thompson was the surname she used when we met, but we discovered her birth name was Santos. Why would she change her name back to her maiden name? I asked myself aloud. To hide from someone, Martinez replied grimly. And now it seems that someone found her. We continued investigating and discovered more disturbing details. Sarah had worked as a receptionist at a law firm in Houston before moving to our small town. When we called there, we discovered she had left abruptly from her job 4 years ago, without prior notice or explanation. She was an exemplary employee, said Margaret, Sarah's supervisor. Always punctual, very competent, loved by everyone. But in the last few weeks before leaving, she seemed scared, always looking over her shoulder, arriving and leaving at different times. When we asked if everything was okay, she just said she was going through personal problems. Margaret told us that in Sarah's last week at work, a man had appeared at the office looking for her. He was tall, well-dressed, seemed important. He said he was an old friend who wanted to surprise her. But when Sarah saw him, she turned white as paper. She left through the back door and never came back. My heart was broken, not just from losing Sarah, but from discovering that the woman I loved had lived in constant fear during all the time we were together. How didn't I notice? How was I so blind to the signs? The nights became unbearable. Matthew, who was just a 2-year-old child, began constantly asking for Mommy. Where, Mommy? Mommy coming back? He asked with those innocent little eyes, and I didn't know what to answer. My mother, who stayed to help me with Matthew, tried to comfort me. James, you need to be strong for the boy. Sarah did what she thought was best to protect you both. But how could I be strong when I felt completely lost? The mirror no longer reflected the image of courage I had. At 51 years old at the time, I felt like a defeated man, deceived, abandoned on the day that should have been the beginning of my new life. 3 weeks after the disappearance, we decided to hire a private detective. Frank Morrison was a retired ex-police officer who specialized in missing persons cases. When I told him the whole story, he shook his head with knowing experience. Mr. James, I've seen many cases like this. Women trying to escape abusive relationships, building new lives. But the past always has a way of catching up to them, Frank told me. The good news is that your Sarah seems to have gone voluntarily, which means she's alive. The bad news is she's probably back with someone who's controlling her. Frank began his investigation by going deeper into Sarah's past. We discovered that the Thompson name came from a marriage she had made at 22, with a man named Marcus Thompson. They divorced 7 years ago, but there were no clear records about the reason. I need to find this Marcus Thompson, Frank told me. If your theory is correct, he might be the man who took her away. While Frank investigated, I tried to maintain some normalcy for Matthew. I returned to work at the engineering firm where I had worked for 15 years, but my concentration was completely destroyed. My colleagues tried to be understanding, but I saw in their eyes the mixture of pity and curiosity that made me nauseous. James, you need to consider the possibility that she won't come back, my boss, Mr. Williams, told me one day. I know it's difficult, but you have a child to raise. You can't keep living in this uncertainty forever. But how could I give up? How could I accept that the woman I loved had simply disappeared from my life without a fight? The moments of anguish and sadness were overwhelming inside me. A month after the disappearance, Frank returned with information that changed everything again. Frank Morrison was sitting in my living room, a thick folder in his hands and a somber expression on his face. It was a late July afternoon, exactly 1 month and 2 days since Sarah had disappeared, and what he was about to tell me would change my perspective on everything. James, I found Marcus Thompson, Frank began, his voice carrying a weight that immediately put me on alert. And what I discovered is going to be hard to hear. At 57 years old today, I can say that nothing in life prepared me for what I heard next. Marcus Thompson isn't just a common ex-husband. He's a powerful businessman from Houston, owner of a chain of restaurants and nightclubs. But, Frank paused, carefully choosing his words, his legal activities are just a facade. Our contacts in the Houston police confirmed he's been under investigation for years for money laundering, trafficking, and other illicit activities. My blood froze. What kind of other activities? Human trafficking, James. Marcus Thompson is suspected of operating a forced prostitution network that extends across 3 states. The police never got enough evidence to convict him, but several women have given anonymous testimony about abuse and coercion. The floor seemed to disappear under my feet. Sarah had been married to this monster. The mother of my child had been a victim of a trafficker. Frank continued. I managed to talk discreetly with 2 women who knew Sarah when she was married to Marcus. They told me that Sarah wasn't just a wife, she was one of the women he controlled. He forced her to work in his clubs, to entertain important clients, if you understand what I'm saying. I felt nausea rising in my throat. The sweet and gentle Sarah I knew, the woman who sang lullabies to Matthew, who prepared coffee for me every morning with such care. She'd been forced to live a nightmare I couldn't even imagine. How did she escape? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. One of the women told me that Sarah got pregnant, with Matthew, and Marcus was furious. Apparently he didn't want children interfering with his business. He gave an ultimatum. Either she would get rid of the child or leave his life forever. Now I understood. Sarah had chosen to protect her son. She had fled from a monster to save Matthew's life and her own life. But James, Frank continued, there's more. We discovered that Marcus has a history of never giving up on women he considers his property. He's already tracked down and brought back at least 3 women who tried to escape over the years. And what happened to them? Frank's silence was more eloquent than any answer. At that moment, I completely understood the sacrifice Sarah had made. She hadn't abandoned me for lack of love. She had protected me in the most painful way possible. She knew that if Marcus discovered about me and Matthew, our lives would also be in danger. Frank, I need to find her, I said, determination growing in my voice. I can't leave her in that man's hands. James, I need to be honest with you. The chances of rescuing her are minimal. Marcus Thompson has resources, connections, and a security network that the police haven't been able to penetrate in years. And if we try something and he discovers you exist, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the danger, but I also understood that I couldn't live knowing the woman I loved was suffering while I was safe. We spent the next 2 weeks planning. Frank had contacts in the Houston police and some private investigators who worked similar cases. Slowly, we began to assemble a picture of Marcus's operation and identify where Sarah might be. We discovered that Marcus owned several properties: a mansion in the Houston suburbs, a private club downtown, and a country house 2 hours away from the city that he used to host special guests. It was at this last location that Frank believed Sarah might be. It's isolated, well protected, and far enough from the city that no one would hear anything, Frank explained to me. If I were keeping someone against their will, it would be there. During this entire period, I continued caring for Matthew with my mother's help. The boy was beginning to adapt to his mother's absence, but there were still moments when he would stand at the window waiting for her to appear. These moments broke my heart into pieces. "Daddy, is Mommy hurt?" he asked one night while I was putting him to bed. "Why do you ask that, Matthew?" I dreamed that Mommy was crying and calling my name. She seemed to be in pain. That night I couldn't sleep. A child's intuition is sometimes more accurate than all the investigation in the world. If Matthew was dreaming of Sarah in danger, maybe it was because she really was. That's when I made the riskiest decision of my life. "Frank, I'm going to Houston, with or without your help." "James, this is madness. You don't have training, you don't know the real danger you're facing. If Marcus discovers you exist, then he'll discover. I can't continue living knowing she's suffering because of me." Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply. "All right, but we do this my way. We have only one chance, and if we get it wrong, all of us could end up dead." If you're enjoying our story and want to know how this drama ends, subscribe to our channel, leave your like and comment what you would do in my place. Your support gives me strength to continue sharing stories that need to be told. We spent the next 5 days planning meticulously. Frank obtained blueprints of Marcus's property through contacts at City Hall. We identified the guards' schedules, patrol routes, and the best time for an approach. The plan was simple in theory, but risky in execution. Frank and I would go to the property on a Friday night, when Marcus was usually at the downtown club. We would try to locate Sarah, and if she wanted to come with us, get her out of there. If anything goes wrong, Frank told me the night before we left, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to be a hero. Go home and take care of your son. But I had already decided. I wouldn't return home without Sarah. In the early hours of Friday to Saturday, we were on our way to Houston, driving through the darkness that seemed to reflect the darkness of my thoughts. After 10 years reflecting on that moment, I realized it was the first time since Sarah's disappearance that I felt truly alive. I had a purpose, a mission, a chance to fix everything that had gone wrong. Marcus's property was at the end of a dirt road, hidden behind a dense forest. It was a large house, colonial style, that under other circumstances could have been beautiful. But that night, under the faint moonlight, it seemed sinister and threatening. We parked the car a kilometer away and walked through the forest until we reached the property's perimeter. Frank had brought surveillance equipment, and we spent an hour observing the patrol patterns of the two guards. At 2 a.m, we saw our opportunity. One of the guards had entered the house for what seemed to be a bathroom break, and the other was on the opposite side of the property. "Now," Frank whispered. We ran across the yard and positioned ourselves under a side window. Frank had discovered that this window led to a corridor that led to the guests' rooms. If Sarah was there, it would be in one of these rooms. Carefully, Frank forced the window. The sound of metal against metal seemed to echo through the silent night, but there was no reaction from the house. We entered. The interior of the house was as sinister as the exterior suggested. Dark corridors, heavy doors with locks on the outside, and a smell of disinfectant that couldn't completely mask the odor of fear and despair that seemed to permeate the walls. Frank went ahead, a small flashlight directing our steps through the silent corridor. There were 6 doors, 3 on each side. We started with the first on the left side. Through a small window at the top of the door, we could see a young woman sleeping on a simple bed. It wasn't Sarah. The second door revealed another empty room. The third was locked, but when we looked through the window, my heart almost stopped. It was Sarah. She was sitting in a chair near the small window of the room, looking outside with an empty expression I had never seen on her face. She had lost significant weight, and even in the faint moonlight I could see bruises on her arms. "Sarah," I whispered, gently tapping on the window. She turned, and when she saw me, her expression changed completely. First shock, then terror, then a mixture of relief and despair. "James, no, you shouldn't be here," she whispered back, visibly agitated. "If he knows you came, he'll kill you." Frank was working on the door lock with a small tool while I tried to calm Sarah. "I came to get you," I said. "I won't leave you here." "You don't understand," she replied, tears beginning to stream down her face. "He said if I tried to run again, he would find you and Matthew. He has photos of you, James. He knows where you live, where Matthew goes to school. I can't risk you." At that moment, I completely understood the sacrifice Sarah had made. She had not only saved her own life and Matthew's life by running away years ago, she was sacrificing her freedom now to keep us safe. "Sarah, we won't let that happen," I said, my determination strengthening. "Frank has contacts in the police. We're going to make sure this man gets arrested." Frank managed to open the door, and in seconds I was hugging Sarah for the first time in 2 months. She was trembling, and I could feel how much weight she had lost. "We need to go now," Frank whispered urgently. "The guards will be back in 10 minutes. But Sarah was resisting. "I can't go. You don't understand the power he has. The police have tried to arrest him before, and never succeeded. He always gets out free, and when he does..." She didn't need to finish. I could imagine the revenge Marcus would exact. "Sarah," I said, holding her face with both hands as she had done to me on the morning of our wedding. "Matthew asks for you every day. He dreams about you. A 2-year-old child is suffering because he doesn't understand why Mommy went away. Whatever the risk, we'll face it together." Tears were flowing freely down her face now. "Does he really ask for me?" "Every day, Sarah. Every day." That's when we heard footsteps in the corridor. Frank signaled for us to hide, but it was too late. The door opened completely, and there stood Marcus Thompson. He was exactly as I had imagined. Tall, well-dressed even in the middle of the night, and with eyes that seemed completely empty of humanity. He wasn't alone. 2 large men flanked the entrance. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice cold and controlled. "Sarah, it seems you weren't completely honest with me about your past. Sarah positioned herself between me and Marcus, even though clearly terrified. "Let them go, Marcus. They have nothing to do with this." "Oh, but they have everything to do with it," Marcus replied, entering the room. "Especially this gentleman here who clearly means a lot to you. This significantly changes our dynamic." Frank was calculating our options. I could see it in his eyes. It was 3 against 3, but they were probably armed. "Marcus," I said, my voice surprisingly firm considering the terror I felt. "The police know we're here. If something happens to us." He laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Mr. What's your name again?" "Ah, yes, James. Mr. James, do you really believe the police can touch me? I have sheriffs on payroll, judges who owe me favors, and a team of lawyers who can make any evidence disappear." But it was at that moment I noticed something Marcus hadn't noticed. Frank wasn't just calculating an escape, he was recording everything. There was a small device in his hand that was capturing every word Marcus said. "Actually," Frank said calmly, "the federal police are very interested in your operations, Mr. Thompson. And now we have you confessing coercion and threats." Marcus's face changed instantly. The arrogant confidence was replaced by a cold and dangerous rage. "Who the hell are you?" he asked Frank. "Frank Morrison, licensed private investigator. And as I told Mr. James here, we didn't come alone." That's when we heard sirens in the distance getting closer and closer. Marcus realized he had been deceived. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, signaling to his men. But Frank was prepared. In seconds, he had drawn a gun and pointed it at Marcus. "FBI is on the way. I suggest you keep your hands where I can see them." What followed was a blur of activity. The sirens reached the property, blue and red lights illuminating the night. Federal agents invaded the house, shouting commands and taking control of the situation. We discovered later that Frank had coordinated with the federal police for days. The plan had always been not just to rescue Sarah, but also to get enough evidence to finally arrest Marcus Thompson. Our rescue mission had been, in reality, a disguised federal operation. Marcus was arrested that night along with his henchmen and 3 other men who were on the property. But more importantly, enough evidence was found in the computers and files of the house to formally charge him with human trafficking, coercion, kidnapping, and a dozen other charges. Sarah was taken to a hospital for medical and psychological evaluation. Physically, she was fine considering the circumstances. Psychologically, it would be a long road to recovery. "James," she told me when we finally managed to talk alone in the hospital, "you risked your life for me." "Why?" "Because I love you," I replied simply, "and because our family wasn't complete without you." "Course, but after everything that happened, after all the lies—" "They weren't lies, Sarah. They were secrets you kept to protect us. Now I know everything, and I still love you. Actually, I admire you even more." Sarah began to cry. Not tears of despair like I had seen in the last hours, but tears of relief. "I missed Matthew so much. Missed you both so much. He's waiting for you at home. My mother is taking care of him, but he asks for mommy every day." 3 months later, Sarah was home with us. The healing process was long and difficult. She started therapy to deal with the trauma of years of abuse and the recent months of captivity. I also started therapy to deal with the anger and sense of powerlessness I had felt. Marcus Thompson was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. His network was dismantled, and 12 other women were freed from similar situations. Sarah and I finally got married a year later, in a small and intimate ceremony at the same church where it all began. This time, when the wedding march played, Sarah walked down the aisle radiant and determined. Matthew, now 3 years old, was our official ring bearer. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked me at the altar, echoing the doubts she had carried for so long. "I'm sure I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve to be loved and protected," I replied. Today, 10 years later, I can say it was the most difficult and most rewarding decision of my life. Sarah became an advocate for women in domestic violence situations, helping other victims find safety and hope. Matthew, now 12 years old, is an intelligent and brave boy who knows the complete story of his family and is proud of his mother's strength. Sometimes when I look at Sarah and Matthew laughing together in the kitchen, I remember that terrible day in June when I thought I had lost everything. But I learned that sometimes we lose things temporarily to discover how much they really mean to us. True love isn't just staying together in happy moments, it's fighting for happy moments when everything seems lost. It's risking everything to protect those we love. And sometimes it's having the courage to accept that the people we love keep secrets, not from lack of trust, but from excess of love. If this story touched your heart, if you know someone who might be going through a similar situation, or if you yourself need help, remember, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to fight for true love, and we're never alone when we have the courage to ask for help. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your own stories in the comments. Together, we can show that there's always hope, even in the darkest moments.